The girl couldn't have been more than 14, but her eyes held the weight of someone who'd buried too many people. She stood in Marcus Whitmore's doorway, clutching a bundle of rags that moved with shallow, desperate breaths. Behind her, 3 smaller figures huddled like wounded animals in the pre-dawn darkness. "Please, mister," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They're dying." Marcus had seen plenty of death in his 43 years. The war had taught him that mercy was a luxury most couldn't afford. His ranch sat 15 miles from the nearest town, which was exactly how he preferred it. Neighbors meant complications. Complications meant trouble. And trouble was the one thing he'd sworn off after burying his wife and son 3 winters past. But the bundle in the girl's arms let out a sound, part cough, part whimper, that cut through his resolve like a blade through leather. "What happened to them?" Marcus stepped aside, and the children shuffled into his cabin like ghosts. The girl's siblings, he realized, 2 boys and what looked like a baby, wrapped in that moving bundle. Fever took Ma and Pa 4 days back. The girl's chin trembled, but she held his gaze. "Been walking since. Town folks. They don't want sick children around." The youngest boy, maybe 6 years old, swayed on his feet. His lips had a blue tinge that Marcus recognized. Without thinking, he caught the child before he collapsed. "Name's Sarah," the girl said, watching Marcus cradle her brother. "This here's Tommy. That's Ben." She nodded toward the 10-year-old leaning against the wall. "And this is little Mary." She adjusted the bundle, revealing a baby's fevered face. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd built brick by careful brick. These weren't his children. This wasn't his responsibility. He'd learned the hard way that caring meant losing, and losing meant the kind of pain that never fully healed. But Sarah's eyes held a flicker of hope that reminded him of someone else, someone he'd failed to save. "I'll take care of them now," Marcus heard himself say, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in days, they weren't tears of desperation. They were something else entirely, something that terrified Marcus more than any gunfight ever had. They were tears of relief. Marcus spent the next 3 days learning that caring for 4 sick children was harder than breaking wild horses. The baby, Mary, burned with fever that wouldn't break, despite the cool cloths and whispered prayers Sarah administered with the skill of someone far older than her years. Tommy's breathing came in harsh rattles that echoed through the cabin at night. Even Ben, who tried to act tough, couldn't hide the way his hands shook when he thought no one was looking. "You don't have to do this," Sarah said on the 3rd morning, finding Marcus boiling water for more medicine. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She'd barely slept, rotating between her siblings like a sentry guarding the gates of hell. Marcus poured the steaming water over chamomile leaves his late wife had grown. "Someone has to. We're not your kin." "No," Marcus agreed, testing the tea's temperature against his wrist. "But you're here." The simple truth of it sat between them like a stone dropped in still water. Sarah studied his weathered face, searching for the lie she'd learned to expect from adults. Finding none, she nodded once and returned to Mary's side. But word traveled fast in sparse country. By noon, Marcus spotted the dust cloud on the horizon, 3 riders approaching at a deliberate pace. His stomach turned to lead. He recognized the lead horse, Sheriff Coleman's bay mare. "Sarah," Marcus called softly, "take the children to the back room. Don't come out until I say." Her eyes widened with the fear of someone who'd learned that men in authority rarely brought good news. "What is it?" "Probably nothing. Go on now," the riders reined up 20 feet from the porch, close enough to talk, but far enough to draw iron if needed. Sheriff Coleman touched his hat brim in greeting, but his expression remained stone-cold serious. The 2 men flanking him, Deputy Hayes and Dr. Morrison from town, looked equally grim. "Marcus," Coleman said, "heard you took in some sick children." "Heard right. Dr. Morrison here says they might be carrying something contagious. Scarlet fever, maybe worse." The sheriff's hand rested casual-like on his gun belt. "Town council's concerned about it spreading." Marcus felt the weight of eyes watching from the cabin's back window. "Children are under my roof now. My responsibility." "That's admirable," Dr. Morrison interrupted, mopping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. "But if this disease spreads to town, we could lose dozens, maybe hundreds." The unspoken words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. They wanted the children gone. Dead or alive didn't seem to matter much to them. "What exactly are you suggesting, Doc?" Coleman shifted in his saddle. There's a quarantine station 50 miles north. Clean, isolated, they'd be cared for proper. Marcus had heard of such places. Most children who went there never came back. The ones who did return spoke in whispers about the mass graves dug behind the buildings. And if I refuse? The silence stretched taut as a bowstring ready to snap. The answer came not in words, but in the metallic click of Coleman's thumb easing back the hammer on his Colt. The sound echoed like a death knell across the empty prairie. "This ain't a request, Marcus," Coleman said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd made peace with ugly necessities. "Doc Morrison's got authority from the territorial governor. Public health trumps personal feelings." Marcus felt sweat trickle down his spine despite the morning chill. "Bay." "End him." The cabin held its breath. He could sense Sarah pressed against the back window, probably holding little Mary while the boys flanked her like tiny soldiers preparing for a siege they couldn't win. "You boys rode 15 miles to threaten a man taking care of orphaned children," Marcus said, his voice steady as bedrock. "That sit right with your consciences?" Deputy Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, but Coleman's expression never wavered. "Seen whole towns wiped out by fever. Women, children, elderly folk, all dead because someone thought kindness mattered more than common sense." Dr. Morrison urged his horse closer, leather creaking in the stillness. "Be reasonable, Whitmore. You've got no medical training, no proper supplies. Those children need professional care. Those children need to live, and they will, at the quarantine station." The lie hung between them like a rattlesnake coiled to strike. Marcus had seen Morrison's handiwork before, the way the doctor's compassion evaporated when treating became inconvenient. The man who'd let Marcus's own son die of pneumonia while tending to the banker's wife's headaches. "I'm not turning them over," Marcus said quietly. Coleman's horse sidled nervous beneath him, sensing the tension that crackled like lightning before a storm. "Then you're choosing to resist lawful authority. That makes you an accessory to endangering public welfare." The legal words meant nothing out here. This was about power, plain and simple. The power to decide who lived and who died based on convenience and fear. "How many men you bring?" Marcus asked. "Just us 3. Coleman's smile held no warmth. "Figured that'd be enough for one stubborn rancher." Marcus counted the odds. 3 armed men against 1, with 4 sick children depending on the outcome. His Remington hung heavy on his hip, but drawing meant shooting, and shooting meant someone would die. Maybe everyone. Behind him, he heard the soft creak of floorboards. Sarah's voice drifted through the window crack, singing a lullaby to little Mary in a voice that trembled like wind through winter wheat. The sound made his decision easier than breathing. "You want them," Marcus said, stepping down from the porch with his hand hovering near his gun. "You'll have to go through me." The standoff stretched like pulled taffy, each man calculating angles and odds, while the prairie wind whispered secrets through the grass. Then, cutting through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds, came the sound of bare feet on wooden planks. Sarah stepped onto the porch carrying little Mary, her thin shoulders squared with a dignity that would have made queens weep. Tommy and Ben flanked her, their fevered faces pale but determined. They looked like fallen angels preparing for their final battle. "No," Marcus said without turning around. "Get back inside." "They're here for us," Sarah replied, her voice steady as stone. "We won't hide while you fight our fight." Dr. Morrison's face softened slightly at the sight of the children. Marcus caught the change and pressed the advantage. "Take a good look, Doc," Marcus called. "These the monsters you're so afraid of? A 14-year-old girl trying to keep her family alive? A baby who's never done harm to anyone?" Coleman's jaw tightened. "Disease doesn't care about innocence, Whitmore." "Neither does cruelty, apparently." Sarah stepped closer to Marcus, still holding Mary. "Mister," she said to Coleman, her young voice carrying surprising strength, "I understand you're afraid. Folks in town think we might make them sick, Coleman B. Linked, clearly not expecting such directness from a child. But we're not animals to be put down," Sarah continued. "We're people. We hurt. We hope. We love our family just like you love yours." She paused, studying Coleman's weathered face. "You got children, Sheriff?" The question hit its mark. Coleman's hand moved away from his gun, and for a moment, Marcus glimpsed the man beneath the badge, a father wrestling with duty and conscience. "2 daughters," Coleman admitted quietly. "Then you know," Sarah said simply. "You know what it's like to want to protect them. That's all we want. A chance to live, to heal, to maybe see another Christmas together. Deputy Hayes cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Sheriff, maybe we should—" "Quiet," Coleman snapped, but his voice lacked its earlier steel. Dr. Morrison dismounted slowly, his medical bag in hand. "Let me examine them," he said. "Properly this time. If they're not contagious, if it's just exhaustion and malnutrition—" Marcus felt Sarah's small hand slip into his calloused palm. The gesture, so simple, so trusting, nearly broke him. When was the last time someone had reached for him in hope instead of fear? "Whatever you decide," Sarah said to the men, "we stay together. That's all we ask." The wind carried the scent of approaching rain and something else, the possibility of mercy in a world that had forgotten how to be merciful. Coleman holstered his weapon with a heavy sigh. Dr. Morrison's examination took nearly an hour. He checked temperatures, listened to breathing, examined throats and skin with a thoroughness that surprised everyone, especially Marcus, who remembered the man's previous indifference. When Morrison finally closed his medical bag, his expression had transformed completely. "Malnutrition and exhaustion," he announced. "Some lingering effects from childhood illnesses, but nothing contagious, nothing that proper food and rest won't cure." He looked directly at Coleman. "These children pose no threat to anyone." Coleman removed his hat and ran weathered fingers through graying hair. "Doc, you're certain? On my medical license and my oath to do no harm." Morrison's voice carried the weight of professional conviction. "They need care, not quarantine." The sheriff studied the children for a long moment, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. Sarah still held Mary, who had finally stopped crying and was reaching tiny fingers toward the sunlight streaming across the porch. Tommy leaned against Ben, both boys watching the adults with eyes that had learned to expect disappointment, but still harbored fragments of hope. "Hell," Coleman muttered. He turned to Marcus. "You sure you can handle 4 children? It's not exactly a small responsibility." Marcus looked at Sarah, remembering his promise. "I'll take care of them now," he'd said. The words had cost him nothing to speak, but everything to honor. "I'm sure," Marcus replied. Coleman nodded slowly. "Then I reckon that's settled." He mounted his horse, then paused. "Town council won't like this decision." "Town council doesn't have to live with the alternative," Marcus said. Deputy Hayes and Dr. Morrison mounted up, but Morrison lingered. "I'll come by next week to check on them. Bring some proper medicine." He paused, shame flickering across his features. Should have done that from the start. As the 3 men rode away, Sarah finally let the tears come. Not the desperate tears of arrival, but something cleaner. Relief mixed with gratitude, hope tempered by exhaustion. "Why?" she asked Marcus as they watched the riders disappear into heat shimmer. "Why risk everything for strangers, Mark?" Us thought of his own son, of promises he'd failed to keep, of chances for redemption that rarely came wrapped in such small packages. Maybe because strangers are just family we haven't met yet. Years later, when Sarah had grown into a woman of remarkable strength and compassion, she would remember that morning on the porch as the moment she learned that heroes weren't the men with the fastest guns or the most land. They were the ones who opened their doors when darkness fell, who kept promises when keeping them cost more than breaking them. She would tell her own children about the rancher who chose love over law, mercy over fear, and how sometimes the smallest acts of kindness echo across generations like ripples on still water. And every autumn, when the prairie wind carried the scent of approaching winter, she would look toward the old ranch house where 4 lost children had found not just shelter, but home, a place where broken things could heal and forgotten hearts could remember how to beat with purpose. The last frame would show Marcus teaching Tommy to rope cattle, while Sarah helped Ben with his letters, little Mary toddling between them all, like sunlight made manifest. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, stronger for having been tested in the fire of human cruelty and tempered in the cool waters of unexpected grace. Stories like this aren't just told, they're felt. If you felt it too, subscribe and stay with us.